Ellen, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. And I do want to actually encourage people to keep their picture on if you feel comfortable. Because one of the strangest things over Zoom is when everybody turns off their camera and you feel like you're talking to a wall. So it's so nice to have either people nodding or I can kind of see their question. And then I know to, explain a little bit more, that sort of thing. But thank you, Marlene.
We'll take all of your pictures off when we do this recording. So actually,
if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Great. So I love Parents Helping Parents. So this is really a wonderful opportunity to get to share with you guys. Good, you see my presentation. So a little bit about me. So I'm an estate planning attorney and I specialize in special needs planning. I actually got into the field because I was kind of volunteering in the field. I think mental health challenges run in my family. And also now I'm realizing high functioning autism does, and my older son was diagnosed with high functioning autism when he was 4. So it's interesting. I went from being an advocate in the community to being a parent, and it's a very different role, but it's still, this is the community that I love. And so I'm so happy to be talking to all of you guys. Okay, so today we're talking about estate planning, what that looks like. What are our goals? And really, all parents, what we want is to maximize our child's quality of life. We want them to be as independent and happy and successful as possible. And it's going to look different for every family, for every child. We want to protect our children from financial predators because there's a lot of them out there. We want, if they qualify for certain public benefits, we want to maximize those benefits, okay? One of the goals that we're doing is we're actually naming surrogate financial parents. So when we're gone, who's going to help take care of our child who probably won't be able to be fully independent? What does that look like? How do we put together a team? And ultimately, even though I'm an attorney, I hate the court system. So one of my goals is to avoid the court. Oh, great. Thank you for muting. So I'll have the chat up. I do like pausing at certain times to take questions, because I also feel like if you have a question burning in your mind, sometimes it's hard to, to digest the rest of it until you get that question answered. At least that's the way I am. Okay, so I want to talk for a second about public benefits. So what are these public benefits? What does that even mean? So if your child is disabled, and because of that disability, they're not able to work and support themselves, okay, then they can qualify for certain public benefits. Now, keep in mind, typically you'd apply with Social Security Administration and typically you're denied. And then you appeal, and then perhaps you appeal again. All right, so it's not necessarily a cut and dry thing, but the way I think about it is, what do we get when we're working and supporting ourselves? Well, there's really 2 major things we get. We get an income stream, right, or salary, and we get health insurance. Now, it's my hope that someday in America, we will get over this, health insurance being tied to our jobs, but we're not there yet. So we deal with what we have. All right. So these are the 2 types of income streams. So we have the income stream and we have the health insurance. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can qualify for these. One way is if you're disabled, you can't work and support yourself, and you have under $2,000 of countable assets, you're poor. So typically you could qualify for these once you turn 18. You can qualify for an income stream, supplemental security income, SSI. You get about $1,000 a month, not a ton, but it's something, and anything helps. And if you get even $1 of SSI, you automatically qualify for Medi-Cal, which is California's version of the federal Medicaid system. Now, the rules for Medi-Cal are actually in the process of changing, which is super exciting, okay? Because you see, this is under $2,000 of the resources that you can have. Well, Medi-Cal is actually increasing it. Now, it's $130,000 that your child can have and still qualify for Medi-Cal. And starting next year in 2024, that resource limit is being completely eliminated. Yeah. All right. And I just did a video on this. So I think it was released today or yesterday on YouTube. So it's super exciting. No other state is doing this, by the way, only California. We're in our bubble and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm so happy to be here. All right. Then there are other benefits that you can get if you're disabled and you can't work and support yourself, and your parent or you have paid into the system for a while. So these are entitlement based because somebody already paid in. Okay, so this might be if the parent works for a while and then retires. If their child qualifies, their child can get 50% of what the parent's receiving at the same time. Okay, and once the parent dies, that child can get 75% of the parent's benefits. And the really nice thing about, so that's called child disability benefits. And after receiving 2 years, well, it's actually 2 years and 5 months, then you can qualify for Medicare, which, as many of you know, it's imperfect, but it's very good. It's quite comprehensive. And some people actually are Medi-Medi. They get Medi-Cal and Medicare. Some people get a couple of income streams. So the type of planning, so why might you need a special needs trust? Okay, well, one reason is if your child is receiving needs-based public benefits, like under $2,000 of countable assets. If they receive an inheritance outright, then that can bump them off their public benefits because all of a sudden they have more than $2,000. Okay. The other reason why you might want to set up a special needs trust, and I'm going to tell you what it is, okay? But the other reason why you might is for protection of your child because somebody else is managing it. So let's talk about this special needs trust. Okay, so there's a lot of different types of trusts out there. You might have a revocable trust to avoid probate. If you own a house or if you have more than, it's all just under $200,000, then you should have a revocable trust, all right? But this is a different type of trust. This is an irrevocable trust, which means it can't be changed once it's funded, all right? And it's intended to hold the disabled person's inheritance or any assets they might have, and it doesn't interfere with public benefits. So somebody can have $1 million, $3 million in a special needs trust, and it's invisible for public benefits purposes. And it acts like a safety net. So anything the child's already getting, that child continues to get it, but then this is a backup for whatever they might need. And we all know we all need backups, financial backups. So within the special needs trust category, there's really, and by the way, at the end of this, I have a little link so you can download these slides. So, relax and enjoy. But so there's two different types, main types of special needs trust. There's a third-party special needs trust and a first-party special needs trust. So why would you need either one? Well, the main type that we think of is the third-party special needs trust. That's the trust that somebody leaves money to for their disabled child. It's a third party. It's somebody other than the disabled child who's putting their own money in. All right, that's why it's called a third party special. It's the source of the money. It's coming from a third party, somebody other than the child. A first party special needs trust, on the other hand, is money coming directly from the child. Maybe the child inherited $100,000 directly from grandma. Maybe the child came into a litigation settlement. Maybe the child had money and then became disabled and needs to qualify for public benefits. They can turn around and put it into a first party special needs trust. So there's different rules for each of these, all right? So a third party special needs trust can be set up by just about anybody, all right? Can be set up by a family member, a friend, anyone but the beneficiary, all right? And anybody but the beneficiary, well, also a spouse. The beneficiary spouse is not supposed to. And then anyone but the beneficiary can fund it. So you can have a standalone special needs trust and grandma puts money into it and parents put money into it and auntie puts money into it. It can function that way, all right? And where does it go when the beneficiary dies? Well, the person who drafts the trust decides upon the disabled person's death, here's where we want it to go. And that's where it goes. So a third party special needs trust is the most flexible one, and it's really the best one available. Now compare that to a first party special needs trust where the child has already received their money. Maybe there was a probate going on and the child received money outright. Okay, then the child can turn around and put it into their own trust, but only a limited amount of people can set up a first party special needs trust. The disabled child, if they have capacity, if they understand a bit of what's going on, their parent, their grandparent, or you're going to court. All right, so it's not anybody. It has to be certain people. And also, the first party special needs trust needs to be funded with the beneficiary's own money before the disabled person turns 65. So if there's something that goes on, if they receive an inheritance and they're age 67, they can't use a first party special needs trust. All right. And then the main drawback of a first party special needs trust is upon the disabled person's death, Medi-Cal wants their money back. And they will bring a reimbursement claim against the trust to get that money, okay, to get whatever they paid in, and then the remainder goes where the trust says, all right? Now, I also put down here a pooled special needs trust. So this is basically, it's like a first party special needs trust that's run by a nonprofit organization. And the idea is they pool together a lot of smaller special needs trusts. So these are good if you inherit $50,000 and you don't know who's going to manage your trust. Or if you receive money after age 65, pooled special needs trusts are still allowed to create first party special needs trusts. So that's really your only option, okay? So those are the main types of special needs trusts. Should I pause here, Marley, for any questions?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't have any.
Okay.
I put a note in the chat. Just put your question in the chat, and I'll ask when Ellen, breaks for questions, and that way your privacy is kept.
Great. Oh, there's a raised hand.
Okay. If you want to ask your question out loud, that's fine.
Well, thank you very much, Marley, and thank you very much, Ellen. I appreciate it. Do you think that SSDI should go into trust, or it doesn't matter? It doesn't affect. It does affect, as a matter of fact, SSI. My son received SSI as well as SSDI, and they deduct the amount of SSDI from SSI.
Right. That's right.
So therefore, for SSDI, you don't need a special needs trust.
Exactly. Yeah. So for SSDI, you don't need a special needs trust. For SSI, you do. SSI is intended to supplement any income that you're otherwise receiving. So it would supplement. So some people get like $600 a month of SSDI, and then, SSI would supplement it another $400 a month. But that's helpful. Now, one misnomer out there that I think is important to clarify is that a lot of people think that a special needs trust is very restrictive. It can only be used for a few things and only to supplement things. That's really not true. Depending on how it's drafted, you can draft a special needs trust to be very broad, to be used for anything that makes that child really happy. So it's like setting up a different type of trust, but it can also protect the SSI benefits. So I usually recommend, even if your child is getting just a little bit of SSI, you do set up a special needs trust. And it doesn't hurt, I think, to set up a special needs trust for somebody who's just receiving SSDI, because they might need Medi-Cal. And even though the resource limit for Medi-Cal, let me just mention, is $2,000, it's going to be going away next year. There's still an income limit. All right. So it's about $1,560 a month. If you exceed that, then you have to start paying a share of cost. And that can be very, very expensive. So a lot of people will still want to set up a special needs trust. So it really depends on your situation. Okay.
The question was actually, if I put SSDI in special needs trust, it will be invisible to SSI. Can I do that? And then I get full SSI?
No, it doesn't work that way. Well, first of all, SSDI is the child's money. So if that were to go into a trust, it would be a first party special needs trust, not a third party. But also that doesn't make it invisible. That's still going to be the income. So you can't just say, oh, it's going in here and therefore it doesn't exist. So yeah, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so who to choose as trustee of your trust. of your child's trust, because you can be trustee, but what about when you're gone? Who is going to take over as the surrogate financial parent? All right. You may have a typical sibling and say, well, they can just take over. But let me tell you, usually that doesn't work out so well. All right. Because now you're putting a power dynamic between the siblings. You have one sibling as the gatekeeper for the disabled sibling's money. All right. And also your neurotypical sibling will probably want to just be living their best life and be supportive, but not be the surrogate financial parent. All the time and money and energy that you put into your kids, that's a lot to expect of somebody else to do it. So that's why there's some really good professionals out there. There is something called a private professional fiduciary, and those are individuals who act as trustee. There's also banks and trust companies that act as trustee. Now they typically require at least $1 million in the special needs trust, so that's pretty expensive for a lot of people. But there are different options. So it's and then there's also some nonprofits, not necessarily the pooled trusts or just them, but there's also nonprofits who would act in this role. So this, I think, is the biggest choice when you're setting up a special needs trust, is who's going to be trustee. I often have very long conversations with my clients over this to find out who's going to be, the best for that. Then you might be concerned if you name a professional. Well, who's going to be overseeing the professional? What if that professional dies, or, if it's a private fiduciary, or they retire, or they just don't really like your kid, or they're doing a bad job, they're being too stingy with the money. So it can be good to build in some oversight. And the rule that I like the best is something called a trust protector. So this is somebody who gets yearly accountings, and they can remove and replace the trustee. So that makes sure that somebody's watching, and usually that provides enough, and also some flexibility. If the trustee decides to resign, there's somebody there to appoint somebody else. So that usually is the really good role for the sibling. They can be supportive, but kind of from a distance, and then they can write in and help out if it's needed occasionally. Okay. You can also name an individual and a bank as co-trustee. Sometimes people name an advisory committee, but this gets pretty expensive, so I don't see that as much. Okay, one thing I always recommend is for you to write up something called a memo of intent. This is basically a Dear Successor Trustee letter. This is talking about all the things that you want your successor trustee to know about your child, kind of getting them up to speed right away. And trustees love this. Okay, so anything that makes your child happy, sad, food allergies, individuals that you want them to interact with, people that you don't want them to interact with, that's where you put this. It's separate from the trust. It's a separate letter. But typically trustees will carry this out, and then you don't have to keep coming back to the attorney to update whenever you have changes. All right, so some people might have a revocable trust that contains a special needs trust within that revocable trust. We call it a testamentary special needs trust, because what happens is when you die, then this trust springs into being. Okay. Usually I don't think that that's the way to go. I prefer standalone special needs trusts. Okay. And that is where you create it immediately. It can be funded at any time. That's a lot more flexible in that when I described before, grandma can fund it, mom can fund it, it's up and running. And the other reason that I think it's so important is what happens when you die is the special needs trust is funded. Money goes in, and you're required to send, or the trustee is required to send a copy of the special needs trust to SSI or wherever they might be receiving public benefits. And that public benefits people will review the trust and make sure that it's a qualified special needs trust. And if they have to review the entire revocable trust and look for the special needs, they won't do that. They don't specialize in these sorts of things. So it's much easier for them to just receive a copy of the special needs trust. So that's why I usually say standalone is better. Okay, so I'm going to pause right now before we dive in ABLE accounts, just see if there's any other questions. And then, because that's really what I have to share about special needs trust. Then I want to talk about ABLE accounts.
Okay, so there's a few questions. Let's see. So one was about was about money. You were referencing 1,500 or 1,560 per month. And the question is that over SSI or SSDI, or is it including those sources?
Okay, so that 1,560 a month, that's actually when we look at Medi-Cal. So Medi-Cal, the resource limit is going away. It was $2,000 and now it's infinity. You can own infinite assets and qualify for Medi-Cal, except if you're getting an income stream. Let's say you have a trust with $500,000 in it, and it's the dividends that it's spitting out are $3,000 a month. All right, then that is over the $1,500 a month threshold for income for Medi-Cal. So once you exceed that threshold, it goes from no share of cost to share of cost. So now you're expected to pay for a lot of your healthcare coverage, which is not great. So that's where the number comes in. It's not related to SSI or SSDI. It's the income stream limit for Medi-Cal.
Great. Everyone who's listening, don't be alarmed if we're talking about SSI, SSDI. I realize that most of the families here will not qualify for those tools. And, we don't have kids that fall into that category. So I'm going to try to keep some of those questions to the end here. Let's see. So I got one. My adult child may receive an inheritance soon. Can it be placed in the third-party trust we have established, or does it have to go into an ABLE account to protect SSI benefits?
Good question. Okay, so the best thing to do, if you can, is to talk to the person where they're going to be inheriting from. And have, like if it's grandma, have grandma set up a special needs trust so that the money doesn't go directly to the child, but it goes into a third-party special needs trust. If grandma's not able to do that, if she's incapacitated or she's just not cooperative, then it's going to go directly to the child. And then the child is going to need to turn around and set up a first-party special needs trust. You can't redirect it to your own third-party special needs trust. I hope that makes sense. ABLE accounts are great. We're about to talk about them, but they can only receive up to $17,000 a year. So hopefully the child is inheriting more than $17,000, so the ABLE account would not cover that.
Okay, great. My child has $8,000 in a savings account. Should I move that into his special needs trust?
You should actually move it into his ABLE account. So let's talk about ABLE accounts. Great segue. Okay. So what is an ABLE account? So this was developed back in 2015. It's still pretty recent. This is a savings account for a disabled person that doesn't interfere with any public benefits. And it's a really great savings tool. It's modeled after a 529 plan. If you're familiar with education savings accounts, basically post-tax money goes into the account, and then the account can grow and grow and grow. You don't pay any capital gains tax. And then when you withdraw the money, you're not paying any taxes, as long as you're using the money for qualified disability expenses. All right, so that's the idea of an ABLE account. It actually developed by several families that got together who had adult children with Down syndrome. And those children were working part-time and earning money, but they weren't able to save that money because they had to spend down every month below $2,000. And it just wasn't fair. I mean, this is America. We should be able to save up for what we want to buy, right? So they developed this ABLE account, which passed with great bipartisan support, okay? And it's really a wonderful savings tool. Now, there's a few limitations. One of them is that you can only put in up to what they call the annual exclusion amount. It used to be $10,000 a year. It's the amount that you can give to as many people as you want without reporting it to the IRS. This year, it's $17,000 a year. Now, that's not, grandma puts in $17,000 and uncle puts in, no. Once $17,000 goes in for that year, that's capped off. You can't put in any more, although there are some exceptions that I'm going to talk about. The other really nice thing is the ABLE account was set up with a Medi-Cal payback provision, just like a first-party special needs trust. But states are allowed to waive that. And California and several other states have chosen to waive the Medi-Cal payback. But here's something you need to know. And this just passed, 3 weeks ago? So keep in mind, if you set up an ABLE account in a different state, California just passed a law that Medi-Cal can go after that account in another state. So you need to set up an ABLE account here in California. All right, that's the incentive, the carrot and the stick of making sure that we use our Cal ABLE accounts. Okay, so to be eligible, the beneficiary has to have a qualifying disability. Now, how do you have that? Well, one is if you're receiving public benefits, that's the shoo-in. But the other way you do it is you get a doctor's letter, a self-serving doctor's letter. You go to your doctor, and I actually have some forms, and I can send them around, or you can get them from a video that I recently made. And the doctor signs something saying that this person's disabled and they became disabled before age 26. Okay, so that is age 26 is the age that the symptoms needed, the disability has appeared. Okay. However, good news, that age is being raised to age 46, starting in 2026. All right. And that's really, really recent news. So yay, you guys are ahead of the curve. All right. So starting in 2026, somebody who became disabled by age 46 can set up an ABLE account. But right now it's disabled by age 26. It's supposed to be used for qualified disability expenses, which is very broad, actually. It's really anything that you need to live on. You only get one ABLE account. So a disabled person can't set up an ABLE account in California and then one in another state, you just get one. Now, one of the limitations is if you're receiving SSI, the ABLE account can only hold up to $100,000, all right? However, if you're not getting, and then if it goes over 100,000, SSI is suspended. It doesn't completely go away, but it's suspended until you spend it down. However, if you're just receiving Medi-Cal or any other benefits, it can be as big as you want. Well, for Medi-Cal, it can go up to $529,000, which if you're only able to put in $17,000 a year, it takes a while to get there. Okay, nowadays, if you set up a 529 plan for your child, but you realize they're not going to be able to use that for education purposes, you can roll over $17,000 a year into an ABLE account. And here's the really nice thing for people who have kids who are working part-time. If your child is able to work part-time, they can add their earnings to the ABLE account above and beyond the $17,000, all right, up to about $13,000 a year. All right. So that's kind of if they're not receiving, if they're not participating in their employer's retirement account or retirement plan. So that's kind of like saving away for retirement. So in that case, you can put in up to $30,000 a year, which is really nice. All right. So I have a little comparison chart, and again, you guys can download this later and go over this, but it really talks about the nuances between the ABLE account and the third-party special needs trust. Because sometimes people say, well, do I need an ABLE account or a special needs trust? And I say, yes. Yes, oftentimes you need both. Okay, the ABLE account is not intended to supplant the special needs trust. Just like the parent who asked the question about, well, we're getting, an inheritance. Can I just put it in the ABLE account? Well, only if that inheritance is under $17,000, which is often not the case, right? ABLE account, one of the big differences is that a beneficiary can put their own money into an ABLE account where they can't put it into a third-party special needs trust. You can set up many different third-party special needs trusts, but the beneficiary only gets one. So I'll let you guys go over that comparison chart as you'd like. Oh, okay, and just a little bit more here. How do you set up a Cal ABLE account? You go to this website, and this is kind of the picture you'll see, and you'll see an orange tab, and you click on that, and basically you'll need to provide the routing and account number for where you're going to have the where the money is held, like checking account, and that account connects to or talks to an account at TIAA CREF. They're the ones who run the ABLE account. Okay. So that the money is custodied at, your Wells Fargo or wherever. And then also you provide your social security number, or the social security number of the person who's going to be managing this. So that's what I have about able accounts. And then I have just a couple seconds on conservatorships, but I'd be happy just to stop and answer questions on
Right.
able accounts, and we don't even have to talk about conservatorships.
We've got some questions. So first of all, first question, if my child is living in another state and I set up an able account in their state, and then they move to a different state, where can those able accounts move?
It depends on the rules for that state. So I really only know the rules for California. For example, if you set up an able account in a different state, and then your child moves to California, and the child's receiving Medi-Cal here, Medi-Cal can bring a reimbursement claim against that other child's, the child's able account in the other state for whatever Medi-Cal is paid out here. I don't know how it would work between other states.
Okay. If we have kids who are over 18 and who would qualify for able, can they put their own earnings in tax-free?
So it's not a pre-tax savings thing like a retirement account, but they can put in their earnings, but after the earnings are taxed.
That makes sense. Isn't the able account really an investment account, not a savings account? I would really like a savings option for my child.
Well, it can be used either way. It depends on how much you have in there. An able account can only receive cash. So it doesn't hold, a house or specific securities. And then there's several different tiers of aggressiveness of investments. So you can put money in there and it grows and grows and grows. That's totally fine. What a lot of people use it for is actually if their child has some form of capacity, then they keep a little bit in there. And that's the money that the child gets to spend, and they manage it themselves. So it works either way.
Okay. So able accounts aren't taxable. Can scholarships and such contribute their money, or loans the child takes, can that go into an able account tax-free?
Like transferring a scholarship into an able account? Is that the question? I'm not sure how that would affect eligibility for scholarships, if that's what you're asking. You can always cash out money and then put it into an able account. So that's an option. The tax-free thing, that's not what an able account is for. When you withdraw it, it's free of any accrued taxes, but it's post-tax money that you put in.
Okay. Can I set up an able account at any bank?
No, you can only set up an able account at this one place that I have here, calable.ca.gov. If you go to Wells Fargo and say, I want an able account, they'll just look at you cross-eyed. I mean, they'll look at you cross-eyed for many things that you ask for, but no, you set up you set up a regular checking account at any bank. And then you set up the CalAble account online, and then they link to each other.
Okay, so this question, there's a couple that are similar. So it's basically, our kids sometimes aren't financially prudent, right? They make bad choices about how they spend money.
Uh-huh.
So there's some questions about, how you can use an able account. If it's the child's money, how do you prevent them from using it foolishly?
Well, the child doesn't have to be the manager or the payee, the representative payee of the able account. You can set that up so that you are instead. So it depends. The child can just have a bank account with $1,000, and that's their money to blow through. So you can set it up however you want.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions about able accounts. Oh, wait a minute. It said that it's usable for qualified disability expenses. So can you give some examples of those expenses? I know it's really broad.
It's very broad, which is great, right? So transportation, it can be used for food and housing. It can be used for fun stuff.
I've heard vacations.
I think so. I think it can be used for vacations. I don't think it's supposed to be used for like gambling or around the world, expenditures or drugs. But it is quite broad. I do actually have a slide somewhere where we list it out, and it's also available if you go on the CalAble website. They do have a list of many examples. It's hardly ever audited. So and the penalties for using it improperly are very small. That's all I'll say. I know this is being recorded, so I don't want to say too much.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I've watched some they used it, and they use it for all kinds of things, including, taking somebody with them on vacation. And I mean, it was really broad. So it was, right. And I think, ABLE means a better life experience. So that's right. What they're supposed to be funding is
exactly
give our kids a better life experience. And that's going to be unique for every single kid.
Precisely.
Okay, let's see. Is there no requirement to conserve to be the manager?
No requirement. No. And most children aren't under, well, I can't say most, but a lot of children aren't under conservatorship who are qualified for an ABLE account.
Okay, if my sister, who's 60 and lives in another state and was disabled around 30, but there's no paperwork of when she was disabled, can I set up an ABLE account for her so she can get the max amount of her Social Security?
Right. Well, can you get a doctor to sign a letter? I mean, again, they don't ask for the doctor's letter when you're applying, but you're supposed to have it on hand. So that might be a little tenuous. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. And by conserve, you don't need to conserve. I'm not quite sure what that question means. By conserve. So you don't have to have your child conserved to have an ABLE account for them. This is anybody with any kind of special need, from
exactly
diabetes to Down syndrome. Like it can be mental health.
Yeah,
anything.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Can the ABLE account be created for any child at any age?
Well, they have to be a disabled child, and they have to have become disabled before age 26. But the child could be age 3. The child could be age 80, as long as they fall within those parameters. So yes, at any age of the child's life, you're not required to set it up before age 26 or after a certain time.
Yeah, I mean, if you know your child's going to need some kind of funding stream in the future, the limits of what you can put in annually probably dictate, start it earlier than later, because you can only put in those 17. They raise it every year, but you can only put in a limited amount of money each year. So it does take a while for it to grow. That's right. And there's a very little management fee. I mean, so I think there's hardly any drawbacks to setting up an ABLE account and funding it. And let me actually mention, one really nice thing about an ABLE account is if you want to make a gift to a grandchild, for example, let's say there's a grandma who makes a $10,000 gift each year to each of the grandkids, but they say, well, we can't make it to Johnny because that'll interfere with the benefits or he'll just blow through it. Instead, you can make the gift to the ABLE account. And because that counts as Johnny's money, even if somebody else is managing it, it qualifies for the annual exclusion. And grandma doesn't have to report it to the IRS on a Form 706 gift tax return. So it's a really good way of making gifts to a disabled person. Great. So we're at about 45 minutes. So I said that we would open other rooms or people can stay and talk to Ellen. I have one more question, Ellen, about is there a way for a child to inherit a single family home or rental property without property taxes being assessed? Oh boy. Reassessed. Yeah. Okay.
So I have a video on this. I'm gonna tell you the very short version, but I have a video where I go through this. All right. It's about Proposition 19. So the rules, and I'm gonna stop my share for a second. So the rule, oh, you know what I did want to do before I lose everybody? I'm gonna skip over the conservatorship stuff. Just to let you know, there's 8 of us. There's the picture. And then I do have my YouTube channel, also Facebook and LinkedIn, if you guys like that. Please connect. And then this, I'm going to leave this up. So if you want to take a picture of it, then that sends an email to my techie person, because I'm not a techie person, and she will send you the slides. And also, if you do work with us as a client, then we'll make a $300 donation to Parents Helping Parents. So that's our way to give back.